Oh God, why is this video so hard to do? Hey friends, so for today's video, I want to share with you my experience around my recovery from porn addiction and sex and love addiction. Last week, I shared with you the long story of my recovery from binge eating disorder. And I just want to lay out the fact that, you know what, a lot of these are very much intertwined. And I'm just going to sit here and share with you my experience, and just remember that there's a lot of people who have their own experiences that are different than mine. And it's all about each person finding out what feels right to them and what isn't right for them. So this is just my story, my experience, and I also do not have an opinion on the adult entertainment industry. I'm simply sharing my story, my experience from the point of view of an addict. So just to start off really simple, my first exposure to pornography happened in third grade. Our family got our first computer, we got our first internet, it was dial-up, and the first thing I looked up when I was alone was sex. And I knew how to hide it from my parents, I knew how to delete things from the browser history, all that stuff. And you know, my parents were around, but if you really want to see something, you don't want your parents to find it, you definitely know how to do it. And this was all on the family computer. I didn't have my own computer. So all these things I was looking up was on the family computer when nobody else was around. And the thing is about the dopamine hit that you get from pornography, it's really high. It's like off the charts. So when you're in third grade and you haven't even gone through puberty, you know, you find that, your arousal templates in your mind are completely being rewritten based on this pornography that you're seeing and things that really don't match with where you're at. And so what happened is I had this escalation experience very early on of having to look at all different types of content in order for the dopamine hit to happen. And also another thing that's difficult about the arousal template is you can end up looking at and being aroused by content that is not within your actual nature. So it could be very confusing. It was very confusing for me growing up, regarding my sexuality, my sense of self, and it was something that I did not know how to talk to anybody about. And my struggle with pornography very much coincided with my eating disorder, because I had a lot of shame about looking at the pornography. And then on top of that, I had a lot of shame that I didn't look like the men that were in these movies or in these videos. And especially as I got older, as I continued to look at pornography, I just had even more shame about my body because I couldn't live up to these unrealistic expectations that you would see in these films. And as far as my love addiction, I remember having a crush on a girl in kindergarten, like full-blown crush. I remember even standing in line for like water or something. She was in front of me and just like smelling her hair, which sounds creepy, but like I was in kindergarten, and you know, it just is what it is. But I share all these things because I think so many of us feel like we're crazy for having these experiences and thinking these things, and we're not. And you know, when I was really becoming very overweight in middle school, I started to think that if I had a girlfriend, it would solve my problems. I always thought that if I lost the weight, that would solve the problem. But I also found that if I could get a girlfriend, that means that I was lovable. So I equated very early on that being lovable meant that somebody loved me. And I was the classic middle child, and my parents had things going on, so I had my issues with abandonment and whatever it was. I really try not to focus on my parents as being the source of whatever wasn't working right in my life anymore. But I always thought that if someone would just love me, that I would be enough. And at the core of my sex and love addiction is this whole idea of like, I'm just not enough. I'm just not lovable, and I need someone to prove it to me. Which, looking back on it, is a very selfish way to look at for a reason to get into a relationship. And between my sophomore and junior year of high school, I had lost a lot of weight, going on the opposite end of my eating disorder, and I had a relationship for 2 years that was probably one of the healthiest relationships I had, and I just enjoyed my time with this person, and it was a beautiful high school romance. And then when I went off to college, I was completely back in my food addiction, and I completely went back into my porn addiction. And there's this whole idea within sex and love addiction of anorexia. So within the context of eating disorders, you have people who starve themselves from food. But then in the terms of love addiction, you also can have people who starve themselves of emotional and physical intimacy. And I could see how, while I was a compulsive overeater here, I was definitely an anorexic in this area of my life. And through college, I would not date anyone. All I did was look at pornography. I would just act in rather than act out. And between my junior and senior year of college, I started to date someone who, while I was still very overweight and it was not what I wanted, I felt like I had to only be thin to be in a relationship. And it was something that just sort of happened. And we stayed together. And around that time, I also after college, I had gotten into recovery from my eating disorder. And this is why I think that they're all very commingled. I was with this person for 8 years, and we got married and we were divorced a year and a half later. And we had a good relationship, and I loved her very much. And it also just wasn't working, which is why ultimately the relationship ended. But what I could also see as a big thing with love addiction is this need to feel safe. And when I lost the weight, I felt like I didn't know who I was. But I knew that I had this relationship that I felt safe and comfortable in. And so that's part of the reason why I believe I probably stayed in this relationship as long as I did. Yeah, so we got divorced. And 6 months after that, I got myself into another relationship with someone who had ended up being long distance. And it was another relationship that really wasn't working. And that one ended about 2 years later. And then after that, 9 months later, I got into another relationship that lasted 2 years and then ended. And here's the thing, where we talk so much about people being unavailable. Oh, I dated someone who wasn't available, or they're not really available. And what I've learned in recovery is you only date someone who's unavailable if you're unavailable. And so for a long time, even in my recovery from sex and love addiction, I really put the onus on the other person for why I wasn't happy or for why the relationship didn't work. Sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but when I got into recovery from sex and love addiction, I started to abstain from pornography, and I haven't looked at pornography in quite a few years. But relationships were still very difficult for me because I think I thought that relationships would fix me. And one of the first things I learned in recovery around my love addiction was that you can't really have a relationship with someone else if you don't have a relationship with yourself. And it sounds like such this amorphous idea. And it's like, well, how do you have a relationship with yourself? And you know what? That's something that has been a long journey for me. And I've had to be willing to go through withdrawal. After a relationship ends, I had to be willing to withdraw from contact with that person, and really go through the grief of not having that person in my life anymore, and going through the grief of abandonment, and going through the grief of feeling like I'm not lovable. And even though I've had 3 or 4 serious relationships in my life, it was enough for me to realize that my relationship with relationships was not healthy and it was not working for me. So the reality is, I feel like I've had my most insight into my sex and love addiction over this past year and a half, because when my last relationship ended, I really for the first time was committed to my relationship with myself. And the way that looks is that I find things that I can do for myself that are esteemable. I put the focus on my content. I put the focus on my friends. I put the focus on building my relationships with my family. And most importantly, really going inward and asking myself, like, who am I? What do I want? What works for me? And doing a lot of therapy. And the thing too about love addiction is it's a great distraction from having to know yourself. And the way that showed up for me was after my last breakup, I stayed in therapy and I worked really hard on my recovery. And but then I started to feel better. And I was like, oh, well, maybe I don't need therapy anymore. And my therapist pointed out, she goes, no, like this is the time to stay in therapy, because now your focus is not on this distraction of this person. You really get to do the work on yourself. And so I really got to see how love addiction is not necessarily an addiction to love, but for me, it's really an addiction to avoiding myself. And I think that that's what I've really been realizing over this past year and a half. And some of the difficult things about pornography is that even though you may be abstaining from looking at these things, you can still get flashes in your mind of things that you've seen. And it can be like kind of jolting. And that stuff really dissipates over time. And there's some people who think that there's nothing wrong with falling head over heels for someone. And my experience has been that we live in a world that really romanticizes love and really fantasizes what love is, where the reality is that love and relationships take a lot of work, and that work really has to start with yourself. I'm nowhere where I really want to be, and I feel like this video feels very all over the place, and I'm trying to stay committed to allowing myself to have these videos that are genuinely unscripted, because I so genuinely want to share my message and share my story in a cohesive way. But the thing about sex and love addiction is that the line to recovery is not linear. And someone once told me that there's an order to recovery, in the sense of we first come to have a relationship with ourselves, then with God, then with another human being. And what that means for me is if I don't know myself, then I don't know what I'm bringing to a relationship, and I don't know what I need from a relationship. And then secondly, having a relationship with a power greater than yourself, whatever that is for you, I can't really even bring myself to that relationship if I don't know some part of myself. And then after that, when we know that we can take care of ourselves and we have something bigger than ourselves that is watching out for us, then we're willing to take that risk to be in a relationship. I know this video is a little bit all over the place, and I'm trying to stay committed to letting this video be very unscripted. And I think most importantly, what I would want someone to take from this video is understanding that recovery in this area of one's life is not linear. There's behaviors that we can do that allow us to be sober in terms of our behavior, but sometimes being emotionally sober in this area of our life is a constant learning process. Because really, for me, emotional sobriety in this area of my life starts with me having a relationship with myself and knowing that it's nice to have someone in my life, but what's more important is knowing how to have myself and knowing how to have my own back. And in that independence, I can really allow myself to be open and take the risk of a truly interdependent relationship and partnership. I don't expect this video to give you all answers. I think all I wanted this video to do is to just share with you all that, we're not alone in these struggles. We all want love. And I just think some of us take it a little farther than others. And every relationship I've gotten into, I can see how I thought this person would save me or this person would be the one. And no one is the one. You are the one. And I think over this past year and a half, that has been the big realization I've had. And really learning to take the pressure off of relationships and put it in its right place, which is with myself. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And in the comments below, I'd love to hear about your experiences with relationships and how as you've gotten older, how they've kind of changed for you and what they mean for you. I'm going to just end the video there because I know it's a little all over the place. So thank you guys.